think the last 2.5 years have been quite challenging, not just for me, but for government and for the island as a whole. But I think they've been pretty productive. Actually, the last 2 years, I think we've achieved quite a lot. Definitely trying to steer government in the right direction, and I think I've played quite a positive role in doing that. So overall, I think it's gone well, and I'm looking forward to carrying on really over the next 2 years, 2.5 years. Obviously, the departmental work is quite good, so we've seen very recent changes to the student awards regulations, an extra £1.5 million directed entirely, almost exclusively into the maintenance side of things. I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. I had a lot of work to get that over the line, which was really good. Earlier on in the session, was pushing very strongly to get a living wage established for the island, which we've now done. So the government is now committed to updating that and keeping it going. Again, I don't think we've quite gone far enough with that. I think there's still more work to be done, but at least we're moving in the right direction. So there's a couple of really big key points I think that we've managed to get out in the last few years, and I'm really happy to play a part in those. Well, I think that there hasn't really been any reform of the budget process, which is proven to be a stumbling block, I think, to getting a lot of the changes through. And a good example of that will be we had a climate change debate this week in Timor, but actually the government hasn't allocated any money to deal with the climate change issue as a dedicated item. The reason for that is we don't budget based on our outcomes, so we don't look at the problem and say, right, how much money do we need to solve that particular problem. What we do is we say, how many buses do we need? So we'll allocate a budget for some buses, and then we say, well, how many schools do we need? We allocate a budget for some schools, but actually there isn't any joined up approach to say, well, actually, in amongst all of this, how much money should we be spending, for example, dealing with the climate impact of buying new buses or building new schools. And I think we need to start thinking a little bit more strategically, a bit more big picture. And I set that out in my manifesto 2.5 years ago. It's a long journey to get there, because it is fundamentally changing the way that government thinks about spending money. It's a long journey. We're starting to get there. I think we're starting to make some progress, and we're starting to see priority-based budgeting be trialled in departments like the education department. So we're starting to get there, but I think it is a long journey. That's quite an interesting one. I think the primary focus for me to try and help support Ramsey has been to try and improve wages on the island, so trying to push the minimum wage up, trying to push for a living wage, trying to make sure that people can earn enough to pay their bills. When it comes to specifically local issues, I think one of the key ones I set out inside my manifesto was to make sure we protected the courthouse building. Obviously, at the time of the election, we just lost the post office from that space, and so it became absolutely essential that we protected it as a community facility. So I was really supportive when the commissioners stepped in and decided they wanted to protect that, and you'll have seen the recent press release from the trust that's organising that, and actually that is exactly the right thing to do. I'm completely 100% behind trying to keep that building as a community space. So even in those little areas, sometimes you can help push things forward just by continually pushing, continually having these conversations with government departments to make sure they are doing the right things. So absolutely, local issues like that are quite key, but unfortunately as an MHK quite often you can't influence them as much as you would like to, but it is about just being as supportive as you can, as and when you can, really. I am always actually quite amazed by the amount and the variety of issues that people want to talk about. Often it's lots of little things, so it could be people having particular issues with their own circumstances with housing or transport, or it could be wider concerns. When the demand responsive transport was launched, there were a lot of concerns about that. Mostly, if I was trying to group them thematically, the biggest theme that tends to come through a lot is cost of living. Actually, people concerned about the rising costs of living on the island, and how they're going to make ends meet, making sure things are affordable for them. And really, when it comes to the affordability issue, they then tend to link in quite heavily with this idea of fairness, that actually everyone should be paying fair amounts into the system and getting a fair amount back out again. Without wanting to go into specifics, that tends to be the broadest conversation I think that I have with people on a regular basis. Yeah, and again, this comes back to employment and making sure that people get a living wage when they're working. It comes back to making sure that when charges are put up by government, they're not unfairly targeting any particular group of people, and make sure that people that are on fixed incomes are getting adequately protected. I think the biggest challenge, obviously, that we have right now is trying to make sure we have a plan to properly address climate change on the island, or rather the impact of climate change on the island, trying to decarbonise our economy, making sure that we're moving towards renewable power generation and sustainable power generation. I think we have a real problem when it comes to skills in the business community, trying to actually get enough people to fill the jobs that we have, and making sure that people who want to get a better job can have access to training and support in order to get the right skills that they need to get the job that they want. And I think for me they're the two biggest challenges by far. And then further down the list we still haven't properly resolved the public sector pensions issue. It's mostly there, but we haven't quite got a proper issue resolved with that. And then we still have issues surrounding things like the VAT agreement with the UK. We're still waiting to hear back from Treasury as to how that may or may not be renegotiated, and that could potentially have another impact on Ireland finances. So there are a lot of things coming down the road, a lot of challenges ahead, but I think for me the biggest ones that the government is facing that we really need to tackle will be climate change and the impact that's going to have on the island.